Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Book Talks with Yo. My name is Yoanna and today we are talking about the importance of setting in your novel. The setting is the context of your story. This is the time, the place, and the social environment in which your story or your novel takes place. And as you can guess, it is a pretty crucial part of crafting a good novel because it not only establishes the mood and the atmosphere of the whole text, but it can also help you drive the plot forward or get across the themes and the topics you're exploring in your novel better, and as well as that, it can really help you flesh out your characters. Or in other words, without the setting, your story just exists in some thin air or even a vacuum, and it's not really immersive. It doesn't really exist. Is it real if there is no place and no time that this thing is happening? It can't really exist. So yeah, setting is important, and today we are going to talk about a few ways in which you can use setting to improve your story, and I'll give you some advice about crafting the perfect setting for your story. So without further ado, let's just get into the video. Okay, so one way you can use setting is as a metaphor or symbolically to illustrate or get the messages and themes of your novel better, carry them out better. And when you set your story in a particular place or location, for example, it has a particular mood or particular feel to it. For example, if you set a novel in a very, very busy city like London or New York or something like this, maybe you're doing it in order to show us that the character is really struggling to get on top of everything that they have to do, or in order to show us that they've lost themselves in all this chaos around them. And just remember that a story set in, for example, London will have a really different feel than the one set in a small coastal town or a village. And you can explore different places and different places in order to see what works better for your characters, for making them feel real, and for overall for your plot. And as well as that, another way you can use setting symbolically or metaphorically, it is to use the seasons. As you know, we usually associate with the seasons with the different stages of life. We usually associate spring with reborn or with birth. Summer, therefore, is our youth, and then autumn is our adulthood, and winter is usually associated with death. As well, of course, there are exceptions from this, but usually there are certain connotations that go alongside with the season. So if you set a novel in spring, for example, it may have a different feel to one set in winter. And now that I'm actually talking about the seasons, it reminds me that you can really play around with the weather. It is still part of the setting. It still sets the mood and the atmosphere of your novel. And it is one of the greatest writing tools to evoke emotions, to produce a certain mood, to set the atmosphere, or even to foreshadow something that is about to happen, or some emotion, or even provoke an emotion in your characters. Just playing around with the weather in your story, but playing around with the weather in such a way that it corresponds with what is happening and what the characters are feeling, just adds this final touch to your story that makes it seem a lot more immersive and just professional. Which leads me to another way you can use setting, and this is to evoke or illustrate emotions in your characters. And I already said how you can use the seasons or the weather to do that, to evoke or foreshadow emotions, but as well as that, you can use the particular place, the location, and the social environment that you are setting your story in. For example, you can use some particular place that evokes a certain type of emotion in one of your characters or more of them, and maybe it can stir up some memories and remind them of something in the past that happened in the past, which can therefore affect how they act and how they feel now, which can of course drive your plot forwards. And as well as that, you can use a particular place to show us certain fears that the character has, or it might provoke certain wishes or desires, or it can help you portray other features from that character that will just make them seem a lot more authentic. And it is a very fun way to play around with the location, the particular location, and finding a location that has a specific, that has a significance for one of your characters, or for more of them, as I said. As this can really help you build conflict, create tension, create plot twists even, and so on. It really depends on your story. But just thinking about the emotional value of a setting before putting it down to place is a good thing to do when you are creating your story. Another way you can use setting is to make sure that your story sounds accurate and as close to real life or the historical truth. And a great example for this is that if you're writing a historical fiction novel, you would really want to extensively research the social environment and the time you're setting your story in, because this is what will make the story feel immersive and what will really transport your characters at that certain time or that certain place that you're trying to transport them to, pretty much. But it is a very broad theme, particularly in historical fiction, the distinction between accuracy and authenticity. It is a very broad theme, and since my next novel is kind of a historical fiction, I will research the matter further and maybe make a separate video on that, but we will see. But accuracy in setting is also important in contemporary fiction, just normal contemporary fiction, if this is a key part of your story, because it will still, using real places and describing them in an accurate way, will make the readers feel like the story is real and they're reading about real people, which is essentially what you want to do always with your characters. But yeah, now let's just get into the advice about crafting good setting. My first advice is something that I feel like it applies to almost everything when it comes to writing, and this is to know the expectations of your genre and subgenre. And here, as I said, it applies to almost everything in writing, but to setting, it applies to setting as well. Because if you're writing a romantic novel, you would probably not set it at the same place as a murder mystery or crime novel, for example. And of course there are exceptions, but generally you would want to set your romantic book in some quiet and atmospheric place like a small town or some Christmassy, wintry, cozy hut or something like this. As I said, of course there are exceptions, like you may want to make your romance novel a metropolitan one if that works for your story. But having a general idea of what your readers might expect going into this genre is great for brainstorming setting ideas. My next advice is to get really acquainted with the place or time or just overall with your setting. And before you start writing or before you even start plotting your novel, think carefully about the place, the time, or the social environment in which you are setting your novel. Think about, be as detailed as possible, be painstakingly detailed, and especially if this is a time, place, or social environment that you are not so familiar with or you don't know that much about, just be so detailed. And of course, you're not going to include all those details in your novel, and you better not, but it is good to have them in your head or even in some notes if you want to keep them more neatly. It's good to know those details in order to be sure that your story is real and to avoid certain plot holes for future. And the key is to give certain important and meaningful details to your readers. You're not going to give all the details that you know about your setting, but we need some meaningful details from time to time. So, what I mean, instead of telling me, oh, there was a flower, tell me that there were daisies or tulips or whatever that is. Or instead of saying that the protagonist saw her nemesis get out of a car, tell me, for example, the type of the car or the color of the car. I think you get what I mean. But the key here is to not overdo it, and you as a writer get to decide when to be detailed and when to be vague. But those certain details from time to time, those glimpses, make the story feel more real and helps the readers imagine the situations better, which makes them a part of it, which is what we want. And can also help you make it feel more atmospheric depending on what type of writing you are doing. My next tip is one of the most important things that I've had to learn, and this is to use all the senses, or at least most of them, when you are creating your setting. And I know that you might have heard this a lot of times, but it is really a valuable advice. Using the touch, the smell, the sound, even like just more than the sight, just more than one of the senses really makes a great difference when you're describing something, and it helps you set the place, create the setting better, because in that way the readers will not only hear, touch, smell, or feel as your character, but they will also feel like they will experience the same thing they will have the feeling that they're experiencing the same thing as your character, which makes the book or the story immersive, which is what we want, as I'm saying again. And in order to do that, you don't have to overdo it. You don't have to use all the senses in each scene, but using more than one sense in most of your scenes it will just make a great difference in your writing for the positive side. And just think about all the books you've read with great descriptions and how they transport you to a scene. And just appealing to more than one of the senses helps you really feel part of it and imagine it clearly in your head. Because, for example, if you just tell me that you are at a meadow, I will see the meadow in my head, for example. But if you try describing all the smells that you can smell there, or the feel of the wind or something like this, it makes a great difference. Next, very important thing is to not just put the setting in your story, but give it a reason, make it a part of the story, give it a purpose. And I've read a very interesting advice some time ago. It was something about making the setting a character in your story. And what this means essentially is that, similar to your characters, your setting needs to have a purpose, a reason to be in your story. It has to enhance it or do something for it. And it simply means that you don't just choose a random place for your setting and tick the box, like, yeah, I have a setting that's done, because this won't do anything for your story. And even if you think that the setting is not that central for your story, it still is important, because it will affect what you tell. It will affect your characters, it will affect your plot, it will affect everything. So before coming up with a setting, just think about what you want it to do, what the purpose of it will be, and how it will serve the story. My next tip is to not overdo the setting at the beginning, and instead let it gradually flow and uncover itself. And one of the worst things that you can do is overdo world building or over-explain your setting at the beginning of your book, because this is one sure way in which you can lose your readers, pretty much, or at least a big percent of your readers. And I get that you want your readers to get acquainted with the setting that you have in your mind, especially if you're building another world, if you're writing a fantasy novel or a semi-fantasy setting. But instead of having an extensive 10 pages at the beginning where you give all the details of the world, which might put off your readers, let the setting uncover itself gradually throughout the whole novel, giving certain glimpses at particular moments, because it will make it a lot more meaningful and interesting. And last but not least, my advice is to get inspired by others' descriptions of setting. And one way that you can improve as a writer is to read vastly and learn from the examples of others, and just get inspired by what they are doing. And it also applies for setting. Just find an author that has a way of creating a really immersive setting, read those books, and see what works for them and what you can use. An example would be Charles Dickens' London. He has a way of describing the city in such a way that it comes alive on the page, and you feel like you're walking through the streets and the neighborhoods of the city yourself. Or another example would be Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. This is a whole different world, but you feel like you are part of it, and you feel like you see what is happening. Or another writer that actually came to my mind right now is one that I haven't personally read yet, but is one that my mom has been recommending me for years, and she's recommending me that author especially for his great way of creating an immersive setting, and this is Arthur Haley. And I know from my mom, he has a lot of books and he sets them in different places, but he has such a way of explaining those places, of describing those places, that you feel like he has spent his whole life being part of this setting when he has not. So yeah, I'm sure you can think of a lot of other examples to get inspired from. So yeah, that pretty much wraps up today's video. I really hope you enjoyed watching, and if you did, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on my new videos. Please let me know down in the comments, what is your favorite type of setting? Where do you usually like to set your novels or read novels set in that place? Thank you once more for watching, and I really hope to see you all next time. Until then, have a smiley week. Bye!